Yinga's point, right? It's often very puzzling when even government cites, World Bank data from say 2019 in 2025, right? You're the people in the arena. You should be collecting your own data and analyzing it rather than relying on outdated data. So we need a lot more data collection than is happening, both qual and quant, right? Both qual and quant, not just the numbers, but also the analytical narratives that go with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maurice Odhiambo at the back there, but that's the last comment before we come to the panelists. Please forgive me for that.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
But academics now are talking. That's
Thank you, Prof. I'm the last man, it seems. My name is Maurice Odhiambo. I'm from the cousin of IDS, Department of International Studies, with my friend Nyaga. And obviously, the cousins are not happy with Fukuyama being praised in this meeting, because the evidence is obvious across the world. The rise of China, which is an authoritarian state, not a liberal democracy, the rise of ASEAN, and so on. And we would really want that to be contextualized so that when we leave here, we'll be less unhappy. Number two, for Kwame, my good colleague Kwame from civil society, when I went to School of Journalism here in 1998, Joe Carthy told us, the late Joe Carthy, that statistics don't lie, but they can be used to lie. There's quite that debate about statistics. Kwame, we measure, GDP is used, of course, across the board historically and so on, but we've also heard of PPP. Gosh, this is escaping my mind. But I know you know what I mean.
Purchasing power parity?
Purchasing power parity, sorry. So, where should we go if we are talking about development, knowledge, and so on, because all this is tied up? Which is a better measure? Finally, again, for Kwame, you talked about development fads, and we are talking about knowledge and development. Right now, I'm doing some study on AI from a social science perspective. And all of a sudden, everybody is developing strategies. Several countries now, I can count about 6 in Africa. Where do these fads come from? Is it the international financial institutions? And what do they do to our development thinking? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've got para-academics here, and the para-academics is look for the word, and you'll see Tade Aina has used it extensively. Not only Tade, actually, quite a number of other scholars are using it, meaning people who have been in the academia and have got into the world of practice and continue doing academic work from a practice point of view. Proceed on, Grace.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine is very brief. Around the issue of vision, and now that, again, from the perspective of the celebration, we are looking into what partnerships, particularly within the continent, how IDS can better approach that perspective too. We have the vision Agenda 2063 for the continent. I just wanted to hear a little bit more from, I think, Kwame and the other gentleman. What else can we use? Because you are right in saying that as we talk about the vision and we are dreaming, we are imagining, there are certain issues that come within the context of that vision. How are we going to use data then to measure what happened to the Sustainable Development Goals in the context of COVID? Because we believe in that. I think even our Vision 2030 is tied somehow to that. Yet something happened that we did not, the pandemic happened, and we did not take that into consideration. And that even boils down to the issue of counties. What is the story behind county where our people are, county statistics, and reporting back to governments to be able to influence policy? Because it's like the gap is too wide, and there's so much, I think, storytelling about successes without the backing of the, from the data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let the panelists now go around and respond to some of the questions, and I will begin from the extreme, my extreme left, and I will begin with Edward. And Edward, you are between us and Zima.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll respond to a few, and mostly I'll respond generally because I think most of the comments are interconnected in a way. I want to say first that we need to entrench a culture of using data among policymakers, and not just policymakers, but the citizens. I've done a lot of surveys, and to be honest, most of those surveys we disseminate amongst academics and just a few donors. We rarely consider the citizens, the stakeholders down there, including the journalists. So we need to make sure that when we are collecting data or we want to take an undertaking that has to feed into policy making, we need to make sure that we carry the stakeholders along. We need to sensitize the citizens. Just from the start of data collection all the way up to dissemination, they need to be involved. Major players like journalists, so that they are able to push a narrative that we're happy with. Most of the data initiatives that we undertake are funded and spearheaded by donors. Our governments have no interest. That's why we see that we are unable to find or to use data, but meanwhile data is there. But it's just that we don't have use for it. We just end at aiding or helping the donors. So we need to make sure that we develop the data ecosystem. That's from data collection all the way to dissemination, so that citizens are aware and are able to question the data that is collected and what the findings that are coming out. A gentleman talked about the macro and micro. This is the problem that we've been having. And this is as a result of different interests. The way government looks at development, or the picture they want to portray out there, is different from what is obtaining on the ground. Government is interested in looking at economic growth. Is the economy growing? Are the numbers going up? Interested in looking at inflation rate. Are we heading towards single digit? And most of these governments, African governments, are painting a good picture of economic indicators. But there's no trickle-down effect. The person down there doesn't care about economic growth. They care about how many meals they can eat a day. So development or economic growth is measured different and perceived different on the ground to the ordinary citizen. For them, they're interested in seeing, is the cost of living okay? Are they able to, to have electricity, reliable supply of electricity, of which government considers just the macro level? So I've always argued and suggested that we need to balance the two. Government has to look at the long term, but also look down there, have conversations, and try to change what is obtained underground. Most governments have been removed, yet they've posted positive picture on the economic growth and economic development. But it's not in tandem with what is obtaining on the ground. So we need to make sure that we are, what we are posting out there is trickling down or is in tandem with what is obtaining on the ground. We need to develop the culture of funding studies to influence interventions or addressing solutions. We don't do that. There are very few governments that have come up with studies or initiatives trying to address things that are affecting the citizenry. Most of these are pushed by donors. Hickey talked about the the demographic health survey. When USAID stopped funding, do you know what happened? African governments don't have access to the data sets of the current round of the demographic health survey? Nothing. So, and now the guys that were working with USAID are pushing and saying African governments have to pay for them to access the master file for Zambia, for demographic health survey. And it's not just in Zambia, in all the African countries. You follow this up. They are holding on to the master file. And yet we know that demographic health surveys have been very important to come up with interventions that have really helped our people in this continent. I'll end there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I just want to respond to 3 key issues. And the first one is on data collection points. The second one is on devolution and the political mileage in relation to the issue of Fukuyama, which I just quoted. And then the social media use and its disinformation and misinformation, and actually the proper reflection of what we can do with social media. I really do not want to get into the theoretical academical part of this. I just want to bring it down so that we can see it clearly from where we sit. How comes that we have a lot of information and a lot of data that is even collected even within University of Nairobi? But if somebody wants to access that data, sometimes it's not available. Or even if it's available, then it's even sometimes available to the wrong person who is either picking the information without even quoting or something like that. So is there a way that we can think about the data that is even being collected from the universities and making that data sell, either to us or to other people? So this is something that as we discuss the questioning of this development discourse, how we can go about it. Then the issue of devolution, we have seen that devolution in the constitution is very clear, but there's a lot of gaps. If you go to the county governments, you see the millions of money that they're even receiving from international partners. When you try to even ensure that that money and that data is collected to a point, it actually becomes a far-fetched issue. Why? Because we just don't want it to work. And lastly, but not the least, somebody pinpointed about the issue of and the numbers that we have, and if actually those numbers can now work for us. The social media, especially YouTube and others, are really making use of stories. You making use of stories, other people are coming in with even information that is not clear. When you talk to your friends and other people and say, why are you not on social media? Say, YouTube, no. But YouTube is now where people are gathering information. So basically, I just want to say democracy and development can work, but it can only work if we manage to do it in the right way.
Thank you. Let me start with the question from Professor Eka on the state of democracy in Africa. In 2024, we did release a flagship report actually with a democracy at risk with a question mark. Looking at the cases of Burkina, Mali, Guinea, and others where we had military coups and the young men on the streets celebrating, it's tempting to assume that the democracy in Africa is on the decline. However, when we look at the data from Afrobarometer, we actually find that democracy, support for democracy remains very strong and very stable over time. There have been declines, though, in the proportion of Africans that reject military rule. Indeed, we see more people saying the military would be justified to intervene when elected political leaders abuse their power. The assumption, though, is that the military leaders would do so temporarily, clean things up, and then go to the barracks. Of course, we know that in reality that rarely happens. So the crisis of democracy in Africa, I would sum it up to say, it's not a crisis of demand, it's a crisis of supply. People are, expressing frustrations with the performance of democratically elected leaders and the quality of democracy that we have on the continent. Now, Afrobarometer is also part of the Global Barometer series, surveys. But when we compare Africa, sometimes we think the sky is falling. Actually, support for democracy in Africa is much, much stronger than in many global regions. I think the only region where demand for democracy is much higher is in Asia. But otherwise, you compare to Latin America, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, now I'm beginning to be careful here in terms of how I name regions. But I think support for democracy generally in Africa, we see that it is quite strong and resilient. Now, there was a question on the use of quantitative versus qualitative data as a source of evidence. I know there are quite a lot of questions, but I just wanted to come to this. I do agree with you that data is not just quantitative. Data is also qualitative. And we in Afrobarometer, we get asked a lot of questions when people are telling you this. Why are they telling you that? And we know that the why question is not going to be explained in the numbers. But we also don't make any claims that we are the experts in qualitative research. I think this is where we can bridge qualitative and quantitative research. And I think as the Director of Service for Afrobarometer, if I may end with my own observations. Actually, more than 20 years ago now, I sat in a classroom with a professor from the US, and it was an African politics class. And I started to challenge what the professor was saying. I said, no, that's not how it is done. And they said, what is your evidence? I said, I don't have evidence, but I'm from Africa. So I come from there, I know how things are done. And my professor told me, he said, look, go get me the evidence. If you don't have that evidence, then it's just your own story. And that's, I think, what has really challenged me to say, okay, let me have evidence. It can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, but I have to bring up evidence. Now, Afrobarometer data are collected on the African continent by Africans. It depends me, honestly, to attend a lot of international conferences in Europe, in the Americas, and find a lot of people who have become experts on African politics using data that we ourselves have been collecting. But those people don't have the context that the Kanyingas, the Mitulas of the world have, because it's not just the numbers. We also need people who can contextualize those numbers. And those people are in this room, are on this continent, and we need to be engaging in this data ourselves as well if we have to make really arguments that people can believe out there. So that's my plea today, that we need, and the Afrobarometer is just one of many data sources. We're not claiming that this is the only survey data that's available. There are other, I think, my colleague here mentioned the governance indicators. Edward talked about the Mo Ibrahim. There are so many data sources that we need to be engaging in. And Afrobarometer is just one of those sources that is filling into this data gap. I think the question on macro, micro, actually this is what I was trying to explain earlier about the lived poverty, that we need to look beyond just the monetary measures of development, but also look at what is happening in lives of people. Are they, because I come from Malawi, and we've had fewer challenges for the past getting close to a year now. I can have money, but if the petrol is not available, that money is useless. So that's why we are saying, how often do you go without basic necessities of life? Thanks. I think I could go on and on. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll make 3 points. First, it's true. I mean, we have to be careful about talking up data generally, and then assuming that all data is necessarily quantitative. But we understand why that happens. So that's the first thing. The second question is about, in general, how data is used and the political economy around its use. There's a saying in management that if you put an indicator, if you place an indicator as a target, you actually shift people's incentives to cheat by getting close to it or far away from it. And I think that's what the story about the Doing Business survey showed. That powerful countries that felt that they were being, or rather they were owed, started to apply pressure to ensure that their rankings were very, very high. And so the solution to that is not to collect data or to necessarily claim data. It is to say you have to democratize data production and data publication so that people understand under what circumstances was this data collected. Because if that was made available, many more eyes going into it will do that. The third point is, I think that sitting here as an African, one of the things I wished that we would do, everybody has questions about how African curriculum should be developed. I actually think that data literacy should be taken as a civic, or rather, as a power for civic, any citizen. and this is a continent that is battling very heavily, will actually perhaps could revive the prospects of democracy, in my view. Introducing data analysis, rather, the ability to read data and data literacy in the high school curriculum, in my view, is something that we should consider very, very seriously. We ask kids to learn a lot of complicated things that are not necessarily useful. One of the things that would do would be able to actually distinguish between what does GDP really measure and why does my household data show me that 40% of Kenyans can't even buy food. So that literacy thing is something we should take together for it. And Maurice, you and I can have a conversation. Again, as you all know with data, when you want to talk about GDP as an aggregate, it's an aggregate, right? And there are various ways of measuring it. So that helps with the triangulation to find out what works. You're measuring and arguing a different thing. So for instance, Kenya is 66th largest country in the world by GDP size. It is 44th poorest country by income per person. You guys get it? So it depends on what argument you want to make. And if you understand data and data literacy, which we also must promote as those who talk about, rather, evidence in general, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, you provide that context and it helps. So it depends on what you want to use data for. But I conclude by saying that it is not possible to drive development and the diagnostics that requires you to define a solution, to identify a program, without using one element of data. Some of it might be quantitative, some of it might be qualitative, but I think data is indispensable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's clap for the panel. We have eaten you 7 minutes for lunch, but that's not bad. That's quite okay. We would have gone on and on. I would have asked Ann Okello to tell you stories of another country that has got a community similar to a Kenyan community, where time and the distance are almost the same, where you are told we are not far, and yet you are going for 30 kilometers, right? You begin survey, and the research assistants tell you we are not going far. But then by midday, you are still walking, and they tell you it's not far. Which community is that I'm talking about? Madagascar. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll ask Javas to come and give us the next direction. Let's clap for the panelists, please. Is that the clap you give them when they have educated you this much? No.
Yeah, thank you so much. The panel, please. We have some gift hampers for you.
You mean we are lucky?
Yeah. Yes.
Arnold.
All right, and the photographer? Oh, he's here. Okay.
No, we have something for. Where do you want us to do this here? Should be. Yeah.
Here.
So let's start with the moderator.
Professor Kanyinga. Professor Kanyinga.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Great. Next we have Kwame Owino. Great. Thank you so much. All right. Ms. Basra. Great. Asante. Professor Dulani. And then Dr. Chibwili. Dr. Chibwili. All right, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. We may take leave. All right, so we are progressing. And as we know, good progress is a child of punctuality. Professor Kanyinga has done very well in that session, so we are to adjourn for lunch now. And then I think it should take exactly 1 hour, I think. Exactly 1 hour. And then we come back for a very electrifying session that will be presided over by Professor Mitula. A session that no one wants to miss. So let's adjourn for lunch. Exactly 1 hour from now. We'll be back. Asanteni. Pardon? Yeah, the usual places. The key guests and panelists retreat to my right, and then the rest of us distinguished guests where we had our tea break. Asanteni sana, enjoy your lunch.
Social development in the African continent, and in particular all the countries that are involved. We, as the core partner for the Eastern African region, and I'm specifically talking about the University of Nairobi Institute for Development Studies that is responsible for the Eastern Africa region, are very happy to have been associated with the Afrobarometer close to 2 decades, providing data and providing voice to African citizens.
Showcasing the capabilities of African leadership and African partners, we reached another milestone with a daring leap from 20 countries to 35 countries in round 5 in 2011 to 2013, followed by 36 countries in round 6 about 2 years later. This phase also introduced a rolling year-round release of our findings and analysis, enhancing our relevance, visibility, and prestige as a key resource for African research and policy making. These expansions weren't just about increasing numbers, they were about building the narrative of a continent. They confirmed that as a Pan-African network, we possess the requisite talent, creativity, and drive to aim high and to succeed. As we continued to welcome new countries into our fold in round 6, we pursued growth in other fronts as well. A new website made our findings more accessible to all, enriched with media content. Our Pan-Africa profiles captured the essence of the continent's diverse voices. Our field teams embraced the digital age, trading paper for electronic tablets.
Technology has come to enhance Afrobarometer's work significantly. When we started in 1999, what we call the first round or round 1, we started off with pen and paper. But in round 7, we moved from paper and pen to computer-aided data capture. At that point, the introduction of technology allowed us to improve in many ways. First of all, the speed of data collection, the extent to which we had quality control measures in place, as well as the cleaning processes were all fast-tracked once we introduced technology. And so Afrobarometer's data collection, cleaning, and analysis, and the overall turnaround time of getting data to a good standard has been improved significantly since we introduced technology into the process of data collection. And of course, our cleaning protocols as well as quality control efforts have been enhanced with the use of technology in our data collection and in the entire value chain of Afrobarometer production.
All of our operations are managed centrally. We do programming of the questionnaire centrally, but it is in a uniform way that everyone is able to conduct the same questionnaire in each country without having a physical copy of the questionnaire.
I think we can look forward to Afrobarometer continuing to innovate on the types of products that we are sharing with the world. For example, one of the products that I'm currently working on personally is creating a new package of publications called Methods Notes that will help us to explore different methodological issues and help us to take the project to the next level.
By early 2016, we found ourselves sought after by the policy community. earning accolades and gearing up confidently for our Round 7 survey spanning 34 countries. Then a key funder withdrew its support, citing a change in priorities. This plunged us into a severe financial crisis, posing an existential threat to our organization. But even as we planned for painful cuts, our old friends and some new ones rallied to our aid, offering generous financial, in-kind and symbolic support. Among our long-standing allies, Sweden increased its funding commitment to Afrobarometer for the next 5 years, setting an example for other funders to follow. USAID and the US State Department pooled resources across multiple departments to support our work.
Fundraising was done to the best of our ability. The Open Society Foundation's president met me on the sidelines of Mo Ibrahim Africa Governance Weekend meeting or event in Morocco and expressed a lot of admiration for the Afrobarometer and said he and others that he knew were avid users of the data and that they find it a great resource for African development and wanted to help us.
Expanding our base of support, we welcome new allies such as the Hewlett Foundation and the Open Society Foundations, or OSF, under the leadership of Chris Stone, whose generous contribution for institutional support greatly enhanced our organizational capabilities. The National Endowment for Democracy provided crucial bridge funding to fortify our operational capacity. Individual friends of Afrobarometer also played heroic roles in our time of need. The late Peter da Costa, the late Kofi Blankson Okanse, and the late Ozias Tongurua, along with Ambassador Johnny Carson and Professor Larry Diamond, lent their voices and support to our cause. Mo Ibrahim and Akwesi Edu, among others, used their influence to garner support from global platforms and philanthropic foundations. Through this crisis, we learned that opportunity could emerge from adversity and that our work holds great value for many. The unwavering commitment of our supporters served as a resounding vote of confidence in our mission, allowing us to enter round 8 with renewed purpose as we celebrated 2 decades of work and impact. To ensure Afrobarometer's success in its 3rd decade and beyond, we recognize the need to transition from an organic network to a robust, sustainable institution. In 2019, we incorporated as an independent corporate entity, giving Afrobarometer a solid legal foundation and increased autonomy. We restructured the Afrobarometer Board of Directors to enhance its effectiveness in overseeing our mission, evaluating our performance, and ensuring accountability and integrity across all operations. We also established the International Advisory Council, a vital source of strategic intelligence whose prestigious and diverse members help us forge connections with high-level policymakers and potential funders. In 2019, Afrobarometer achieved another milestone with the successful transition from our founding leadership to the next generation. Joseph Asunka became our CEO, and Jima Buedi retired from day-to-day management to take over as board chair.
So what made the transition successful? So as I keep saying, it's all about the transparency and the inclusivity of the process. We needed to make sure that everybody that mattered in the network was included in the process. And we were transparent about the objectives. Everybody bought into it. In fact, we all agreed what we were all achieving in the end. We had support from donors, but also involvement of relevant external expertise, moderating the whole process and guiding us.
The new management team soon faced an enormous challenge, the COVID-19 pandemic. In March 2020, we had to suspend all fieldwork activities, halting our progress halfway through round 8. We used the pause to refine our work procedures and explore the use of telephone surveys, adapting our methodology to conduct our first ever phone survey in September 2020, a pilot study in Namibia on the COVID-19 pandemic.
We have always prided ourselves in doing face-to-face surveys, But with the pandemic, we have now commenced with telephone surveys. And over the past 2 years, we have piloted various formats that we could do that.
Despite pandemic-related adjustments, data analysis, results dissemination, and other activities never missed a beat. Recognized as an innovator by the United Nations Volunteers, or UNV Innovation Challenge Fund, Afrobarometer modeled the economic and social contributions of volunteers to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. In May 2021, we launched our SDG Scorecard series, contributing the perspectives of African citizens to the tracking of progress towards the goals, and underscoring our commitment to aligning our efforts with global development priorities and fostering citizen engagement in policy discussions. In January 2021, we achieved recognition as one of the best institutional collaborations involving 2 or more think tanks in the Global Go-To Think Tank Index. Pursuing our commitment to innovation, we hosted the first Barometer's Brown Bag webinar on telephone survey methods in collaboration with the Arab Barometer and the Latin American Public Opinion Project. We continued to develop outlets for sharing our findings and informing public discourse and policy debates, ranging from the Washington Post Monkey Cage blog to high-level forums in Africa, Europe, and the United States, and a weekly data series on the continent, an award-winning online news publication. After a 7-month hiatus due to COVID-19, we successfully completed round 8 data collection in 34 countries, including our first survey in Angola, and by August 2021, we were ready for a record round 9 in 39 countries, and by January 2024 for a new record round 10.
Now we are at almost 40 countries covering most of the African continent. Over the years, we've basically expanded to include as many countries on the continent so that our data can represent fully the views of most Africans, because we are now covering about 80% of the population of the African continent. Of course, would love to include all the 54 countries on the continent, but that's something we are gradually building up to.
We also continued to expand our capacity building program, which over the years has trained hundreds of young researchers, civil society activists, journalists, parliamentarians, and members of the African Governance Platform through our French and English language summer schools, thematic workshops, mentorships, university outreach initiatives, and staff development fellowships. We lead the Data for Governance Alliance, a 4-year project to foster data-driven advocacy and collaboration between Pan-African civil society organizations and members of the African Governance Platform. With our partners, we are bolstering implementation of the African Union Agenda 2063 and the African Governance Architectures Agenda on democracy, governance, and human rights by equipping civil society with tools and knowledge to engage effectively with African governance architecture and national governments.
The data that we produce are made available free of charge to researchers, policymakers, civil society advocates, international development partners on the African continent and beyond.
Today, Afrobarometer stands as the premier non-partisan Pan-African research organization committed to tracking the experiences, evaluations, and perspectives of ordinary Africans on political, economic, and social developments. Headquartered in Accra, Ghana, our network comprises 37 national partners, including universities, research organizations, and NGOs. Our 3 core partners and technical support units at the University of Cape Town, Michigan State University, and the University of Malawi. To achieve our vision of a world in which Africa's development is rooted in the realities and aspirations of its people, we work to elevate citizen voices as a crucial component of policy and decision-making across Africa. Our core objectives include producing scientifically reliable data and analysis on public opinion, strengthening the capacity of African institutions for democratic governance research, and disseminating and applying democratic governance survey results.
The data that Afrobarometer produces, including the analytic insights that we generate, are all available to the public for free. We do this to ensure that the information that we generate and the insights that we create from the data is available to everybody who wants to access and use it to inform decision making. And this has been the biggest contribution of Afrobarometer to the policy space on the continent and beyond. And different policy actors at government level, civil society groups, research think tanks, both on the continent and outside of the continent, have consistently used the data as well as the evidence that they generate to inform decision making in their own spaces. For Afrobarometer, we envision a world in which Africa's development is anchored in the aspirations and perspectives of ordinary citizens, that development on the continent is driven by what people's preferences are. And we will continue to do this for the next 25 years as we've done in the past 25 years.
Over the past quarter century, we have conducted more than 385,000 face-to-face interviews in 42 countries across all regions of Africa. Using a rigorous methodology described as the gold standard for surveys in Africa, our surveys now represent the voices of more than 3/4 of the African population.
So over the years, really, Afrobarometer methodology has become really the gold standard in terms of how to do surveys on the African continent. But as also a network, we are also constantly learning and refining our methodology.
We also want to be innovative so that we optimize our resources in the long run.
I think we need a lot more Afrobarometers as journalists. I mean, the quality of work, the authenticity of the work, and the scope of the work means that as a journalist, I'm exposed to different experiences from different places. Now, this allows me to incorporate those experiences into my own situation as a Ghanaian and as a reporter. This gives me angles that sometimes under normal circumstances I'll not think of. This gives me perspective that under normal circumstances I'll not think of.
We disseminate our survey findings through a wide variety of channels, including briefings, publications, infographics, blog posts, and social media, resulting in thousands of news reports a year. The Ibrahim Index of African Governance, the United Nations Development Programme, the World Bank, the Economist Intelligence Unit, and others use Afrobarometer data to produce regional and global governance indicators. Government agencies, civil society organizations, media outlets, and academics across Africa and around the world rely on our data.
So I've had a pretty long experience with Afrobarometer. I started off using the data as a master's student at the University of Cape Town, and then I transitioned to assistant project manager for Southern Africa. AB's biggest achievement over the last 25 years is really getting African citizens to understand and value public opinion data. It has gone throughout the continent in more and more countries, creating Afrobarometer ambassadors wherever it goes, whether they're in universities or CSOs or even within government departments, so that it's really bringing this data to the people.
Surveys play a very central role in influencing government policy. We don't have any other body or agency or network that provides panel data each and every other 2 years. So this has really made Afrobarometer the pathway that for Africa engagement.
Les enquêtes Afrobaromètre jouent un très grand rôle. Tout dernièrement, j'étais un peu surpris de voir beaucoup de citations des données Afrobaromètre dans les données du ministère de l'administration territoriale. Et au ministère de l'économie et des finances, les résultats sont vraiment, il faut le dire, utilisés. J'ai participé tout récemment aussi à une activité de ce ministère-là où, pour les aspirations des populations, on a utilisé les résultats Afrobaromètre directement. Au lieu de faire nous-mêmes une autre enquête de perception des aspirations et des doléances des populations.
Our proudest achievement is legitimizing public opinion as a pillar of African democracy. And as our journey continues to unfold, we will ensure that African voices continue to shape a brighter, more inclusive future for the continent. Throughout the 20th century, virtually nothing was known about the values, preferences, or insights of African people. Experts, intellectual elites, media pundits, and politicians purported to know what we thought. Even as political openings began to transform the continent in the 1990s, conventional wisdom held that we were focused on economic and social development and didn't care much about democracy or human rights. Against this backdrop, Afrobarometer emerged quietly. Conceived in South Africa and born in Ghana, the brainchild of 3 professors who envisioned a world in which Africa's development is anchored in the realities and aspirations of its people.
Sometime in 1998, Mike Bratton, Bob Mattis, and I met in South Africa for a conference. We were talking among ourselves and discovered that the 3 of us were conducting opinion surveys. So Mike was conducting opinion surveys in Zimbabwe and Bob in South Africa, and I was doing that in Ghana. We thought, well, it would be a good idea to do this systematically and comparatively so that we get a sense of things. And this was particularly interesting to us because we were at a conference on African democratization, and we realized that up to that point, we only had assumptions and presumptions about what ordinary Africans thought about the economic and political liberalization reforms that were going on in their countries, especially the democratic reforms.
Afrobarometer started in 1999 mainly as an academic exercise, but the overall vision or purpose of the project was to ensure that the voices of ordinary Africans was not lost in policy discourse. Since then, Afrobarometer has collected, analyzed, and disseminated information about citizen priorities, preferences, and their experiences of governance on the African continent. And we've done this consistently in the past 25 years.
Over the next quarter century, Afrobarometer would write a new African story, giving voice to millions once unheard. Building a pan-African network of researchers, Afrobarometer would become a beacon, guiding governments and policy actors, carrying the experiences, concerns, and hopes of ordinary people to decision makers around the globe. Like most great things, we started small. In 1999, the idea of polling African citizens seemed impossible, even laughable to many observers. Professors Michael Bratton, E. Jima Bwedi, and Robert Mattis were not deterred.
Again, the misperception out there amongst people who had the money to provide assistance for surveys was that Africans won't tell you their opinions, right? So that you need to do more participant observation type of research, anthropological type of research, rather than questionnaire surveys.
When the Afrobarometer was getting started, a lot of people thought that it didn't make sense to do this kind of research in Africa, that Africans wouldn't be interested, that they wouldn't sort of mesh with the methodology.
Well, when we put in, when we applied for funding for our concept of undertaking opinion surveys in African countries, some of the people who reviewed the application for the National Science Foundation and others that we applied to were quite dismissive. They dismissed the application on the grounds that everybody knows what Africans think. Secondly, it was impossible anyway, given the African terrain.
Merging independent research projects from Michigan State University, the Institute for Democratic Alternatives in South Africa, and the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, they completed the first survey in 12 countries, from Botswana and South Africa to Ghana and Nigeria in 2001. Their first data set proved that Africans can be scientifically polled just like people in other regions of the world, and debunked the notion that Africans are indifferent to democratic governance.
And again, I think, our very first round of surveys just stood that on its head and showed you that people are quite, willing to engage and to think about politics in a serious way and express their opinions.
Being able to do 12 countries, clean the data set, get it ready for analysis was a big vindication. It was a big validation of our concept that Africans could be surveyed, African opinions could be sampled in the same way that is done in other regions of the world.
Well, we discovered a widespread hunger for democratic governance. I mean, like people anywhere, Africans wish to choose their leaders and they wish to live freely, especially under a system that you might describe as democracy.
Building on its initial success, Afrobarometer extended its reach in the early 2000s, entering a growth phase that continues to this day. As researchers from across the continent joined in, we expanded our surveys to 16 countries in round 2 and 18 countries in round 3 in 2005 and 2006. Having 3 data points from round 1 to 3 allowed us to start doing trend analysis, an important milestone for tracking the evolution of African views over time. Determined to nurture the next generation of African researchers, we also launched our first summer school in 2004, as capacity building became a key pillar of our mission. Offering reliable scientific data and analyses, Afrobarometer began entering the spotlight across the continent and beyond. Whether in a prominent story in The Economist, a Best Dataset Award from the American Political Science Association, or the publication of our first book, Public Opinion, Democracy, and Market Reform in Africa.
Afrobarometer has always wanted to do trend analysis to understand trends in public opinion and to help shape policy. It was important to look not just at a single point in time, but to really understand attitudes and perspectives and how they were evolving over time, especially as countries introduced more democratic processes and people became more familiar with those processes over time. One of the key points on that is that you can't do trend analysis until you have 3 data points. We're always very careful about not taking 2 points as a trend, because events and things that occur on the ground can cause attitudes to change in the short term, going up or down in the short term. Since round 3, which was in 2005 to 2006, we've been able to do trend analysis in a growing number of countries over time. And now we have countries that we can look at for 10 or even 20 years, 25 years for some countries.
The threshold of Afrobarometer data being usable, being amenable to cross-time analysis, trend analysis. And the way we knew, we realized we have arrived was that The Economist magazine decided to feature the Afrobarometer findings in its May or June edition of the magazine. It was basically an acknowledgement that there is now a data set, empirical data set, that can be analyzed to get a sense of African opinions on things around them, things about their lives, things about economic reforms and the political reforms that were taking place around them. So that was a major milestone.
The next steps would be a quantum leap in survey coverage and an ambitious journey toward Africanization and sustainability. In 2008, co-founder and executive director Bratton passed the leadership torch to Jima Buedi, who oversaw a 20-country round 4 survey carrying on Afrobarometer's zero tolerance for error standards. Partners took responsibility for oversight and support to national partners in all surveyed countries. The Institute for Development Studies at the University of Nairobi for East Africa, the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation for Southern Africa, and the Ghana Center for Democratic Development for West and North Africa.
I'm Winnie Mitula. I'm based at the Institute for Development Studies, University of Nairobi. I worked with Afrobarometer for about 17 years, coming in as a reviewer and then eventually becoming part of the team, managing the process and a director for the Eastern African region. So really, it's been wonderful engaging in that process. The earlier phases of Afrobarometer was a little bit difficult, in particular accessing policymakers. But for the other stakeholders like civil society, international development partners that are located within our region, in particular in Nairobi, it was very easy to access them. We even sometimes did disseminate jointly with them, where they convene and they kind of host the convening.
As one of the founding core partners of Afrobarometer, we are proud of the role we have played as co-parents in bringing Afrobarometer to where it is today. As the standard bearer of opinion polling in Africa, contributing to bringing African voices and African perspectives into the halls of policy making across the continent. And we proudly congratulate all of the members of the Afrobarometer board,